We continue 200 Hadith for Muslim Women by Muhammad S. Adly. We are not reading the book here. We are giving our fresh comments on what is being shared. And Muslimah would be the feminine for someone who has submitted unto God. And Hadith would be a saying, a relation of an event, and particularly, of course, we are referring to what Prophet Muhammad taught. Narration 53 indicates that the females that seek permission to go to the communal houses of worship should be allowed. When somebody is a caretaker of a masjid, regardless of race or gender, it is important to inform those in charge and, the community about their funeral prayer. If correction is needed for the rituals, men can say Subhan, or they can repeat the verse correctly or something like that. And women are the ones who are allowed to clap. Some people may be put to doubt as to how much of the prayer they have performed. So when that happens, they should complete what they're sure about as far as the requirements of the prayer, and then perform forgetfulness prostrations. There was someone who asked if it's okay to ask their mother for forgiveness, and they were denied this, and I don't know why, but they were allowed to visit the grave. So if somebody died, obviously your address as such shouldn't be made to them. So for those people who think, those who are of a certain status are alive in God, and therefore, no, once they're dead, you don't supplicate them. You may ask benedictions upon them. The best thing to enjoy in this world is a good woman. Of course, enjoying in terms of pious behavior with her, contrary to what appears to be popular belief in Islam. The person testifying on behalf of the woman is a required part of marriage. Some people will translate it as a guardian, but it's a guardian of the consent and interest. Her interest, not the percentage thing. Dowry is due, even if just a rusty ring. And if that can't be given, then learning some scripture can be. Better than a servant for a woman would be that she said tasbih, Allahu Akbar 34 times, after Alhamdulillah 33 times, after Subhanallah 33 times. And it's called the tasbih of Fatima. Women have ways that can seem curved to men, but we shouldn't try to force them to straighten. There is strengths and weaknesses of mind and body when you compare male and female, but one of the things that you also run into is that there are certain ways more familiar to one gender or another that don't seem so objectively based in their biology. And again, you shouldn't try to force that change one way or another. You can accept the pledge of the women without the physical contact between the genders. The best women are those who don't go up against their husbands in terms of displeasure and all that. But remember, what they're to command towards is the good and the fair. Now, if it's not fair, you can't always do it, right? Because people can come up with all sorts of things that are lawful in themselves, but they can compile too many demands and stuff. And so, there's still an obligation of fairness. And certainly with what's, as opposed to the biblical way of, women should obey the husbands and slaves should obey the slave masters, no matter how wicked it seems, because Islam doesn't have teachings like that. A woman can ask for divorce, but she should have a good reason. And as far as straightening people, obviously, sometimes, people aren't perfect, so therefore, you just got to accept that that's the case. You can encourage good and forbid evil, but both a man and a woman who has had involuntary emissions, particularly in sleep, if they are to the point where the whiteness would be seen, then a full bath for either. And whether or not they've had a dream of a sexual nature, that doesn't matter. Somebody who has been married without their permission, they can go ask for that to be annulled. Now, if a woman has a need, certainly she has to leave, regardless of what anybody may say about it. And people shouldn't bother the women like, the cases of the women who were bothered by letting people letting them know that they recognized them as they snuck off to use the restroom. That's just like with men. Women shouldn't have two uppity names, but they should have good names. A woman may, what you call, steal from the husband if her needs aren't being fulfilled, but it shouldn't be her wants. And that goes for the children as well. Now, I would say there's some issues per se in some countries that, even if somebody's in charge of somebody and they're taking money that should be used towards something that, so it's something to be careful for anyways. Don't give charity to the point where your family's needs aren't being taken care of. And if a woman gives charity of her husband's money, the husband gets credit for that too. Status marriages are okay, but both the husband and the wife have a choice in the matter. Modesty is important between the genders and within each gender. And somebody should not be within the same clothes or bed with the same gender as well. Naturally, people were almost never hitting puberty as preteens, but about 10 years old is when the beds of the siblings and the cousins and all that should be separated. Now, if you're in an area where early puberty disorder is, well, then you might want to correct it to something like that, because it used to not be certain that a 13-year-old female would be a woman. It would not be certain that a 15-year-old male would be a man. That additional thing will be questioned. And certainly we need to go beyond just ages and throw in stages of development, their own mental, sanity and stuff too. And also earlier than that, about 7 years old, you can start correcting your children as far as them not praying, but you should teach them to pray. Of course, there's freedom of religion as a person gets older, but before the people reach the age of accountability, there needs to be teaching. The gender trials are considered to be of the most severe. Now, people say that certain of the worst things are usually within the genders, but that is actually a factor of relationships between the genders. If you intend to do a good thing, you should do that good thing. And if you've said so and you don't, well, that's going to count like lying. Someone who brings up a pair of girls properly will be close like the prophet on the day of resurrection. A righteous wife who fulfills the pledges given in regards to her is about as beneficial as it comes. Entertainment for a marriage gathering is perfectly permissible and even recommended. Well, just like any art, it's important to consider certain principles involved in both the entertainment and the crowd. A woman's like a trustee of the husband and her property, and of course over the children. Pray for the basic needs of your family to be fulfilled. Do your duty to parents, particularly the mother. Don't withhold or demand outside of your right. Avoid the needless questions. Avoid just talking about others, and don't waste anything. The allurement of the opposite gender, or whatever you want to call that, and the world in general, is a test for our actions. Mere stockpiling is definitely an issue. Now, some areas, what might be needed for the worst possible conditions is going to be a lot different. So in the summer, you may want almost nothing as far as bedding, and then you may want to provide for below zero without heat. So, for each family member and a guest. But beyond that, don't just pile up. If a wife has a servant, then she can definitely use the help of those under her employ. But of course, even a slave has certain rights, so they can't be overburdened. Nowadays, employees tend to be treated worse than would be expected of slaves, in some cultures. Aisha was most jealous of Khadijah and that wife, Prophet Muhammad. It had been revealed regarding her that she would have a qasab place in the paradise of the hereafter, and that was the distinction that she was most jealous about. If necessary, a husband and a wife can take a bath from the same pot of water. Pregnant women can put off fasting. In old age, one's parents are supposed to be a means for your entering paradise. The full bath after having sex with one's spouse is not such that requires the unbraiding of hair. Now, a woman whose needs are being fulfilled shouldn't spend anything whatsoever of the husband's wealth without permission. And there should be sort of that's not that she makes the phone call necessarily during the grocery store trip, but she should have the idea of what appropriate expenditures and stuff are based on what they have. A prostitute may be forgiven for her care of a filthy animal. Now, that's not to say that the typical way is that, oh, well, the dog's thirsty, we'll give it to eat or drink out of anything. It's like, no, you really should, if you have a work animal, have separate vessels. But if an animal's, dying, just like with humans, you can go a bit further than usual, or maybe not be as careful, but, certain animals, you don't want to expose their wetness to human if you can help it. Now, wearing a bunch of gold and all that is not really the point, but maybe one of the things about it is that the charity was not paid upon it. In some cultures, women wear that to show the wealth of the family. And of course, wealth isn't something to show off, so if that's the point too, Now, it's one thing to use eyeshadow in the particular brightness or whatever to fulfill a need. It's another thing to seek it out because, you just want to be seen with eyeshadow on and all that all the time. It's the right of the self to not do rituals constantly, to not fast constantly, to not go without sleep. So you should sleep some. You can even go beyond and have extra prayers. And not every day is for fasting. Certainly the holidays aren't for fasting. And as far as, unless it's like a full moon or something and you're going to fast, you shouldn't make a point of it being on a Friday. Or likewise being on maybe a Saturday or Sunday or whatever the holiday of the disbelievers are. Now, of course, as far as the Sunday thing, there's nothing in the Bible that makes Sunday that day, but it's become a way of proving, at least to some degree, the authority that the Catholic Church has over people. Now, widows can observe the retreat. But of course, when it comes to retreat, there was a different way about things. The men tended to be on the sides and the women on the backs of the buildings if you're using a one-room thing. A lot of places, the men and women don't have to see each other once they enter the room. And I don't know if it's going to be in place, but there's supposed to have been an ordering of a building that's been entrusted, and it actually, you could say, has a different men's and women's entrance. It's a one-room building, but I put the thing, the furniture in the middle to divide the one side and the other. That could fulfill some of that. Some people will go off to the place of worship and sleep there because some issue happened with their family, but of course that's not the point of the masjid, and it's best to deal with these family disputes prior to going. Mothers have greater rights over one than fathers do. Now, If menses come during a pilgrimage and the woman is not able to fulfill the rest of the, requirements of the pilgrimage, then, that's fine. And if even the circumambulations have been done, then, at least it's some pilgrimage, right? Now, there are those who like to stay, for example, after the throwing of the stones and all that. But if things have been started towards that, like there's been the farewell circumambulations, then, a complete pilgrimage is obviously done of the greater pilgrimage. Sincere repentance is, of course, an important thing, and people who seek the punishment for their crimes that require punishment, and I don't mean the state horrible way of locking people up, and it's up to the guards and the prisoners how they want to punish people. That's not necessarily what people seek out, but the punishment that God has prescribed, then, it's just to be presumed that they have fully repented. Now, there's cases where it was known that the full repentance was had. And when it comes to women, if it's a sexual crime, there's definitely seeing if she's pregnant and delaying till after the child's been weaned and all that, and then she can get her penalty. Or if it's a violent penalty, again, that can be sought out. If she's killed someone or whatever, then the death penalty is not instituted until after they're sure that there's no pregnancy or the pregnancy's been carried out, etc., etc. Now, rather than the bigotry and whatnot that people are going to obviously accuse people of, the punishment is the same whether people are rich or poor or, whatever. If it is or might be a night of power, which is one of the last 10 of Ramadan, some years the last 10 include the 20th, some years the 30th is included, but there's only the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and you seek the divine love and pardon during that time. At least Aisha was allowed to pray inside the Kaaba once, and she was told that the people should have made it bigger, but the people leading the prayer pray outside of it. And there are narrations that indicate that you shouldn't pray in or on it. So, I guess if one's trapped, that's a different story for a lot of things. But, like there's huge, huge graveyards, and one may not be able to leave. But then again, if there's space in between the graves and you put something down, and that's, or some graveyards have a place in the middle that there's no graves. So that's again different. When Salama was sick, she was allowed to do her circumambulations upon an animal, and something that Prophet Muhammad recited by the side of the Kaaba was Surah 52. A person can delay going out for battle or answering the call for the war if they have not consummated the marriage. They can do that first. A woman should not be into S&M, and by that, the willing sadomasochism. And of course, it's not really fitting for a woman to be the person who carries out the criminal punishment. The people who are immodest, whether they're wearing clothes that remind of nakedness or may, seem like that at something, like the leotards and all that sort of stuff. And the women with the ridiculous hairdos that they do to attract sexual attention for other than their husbands. Men should treat the women better than they would slaves. And, neither should be just, whipped or something for no cause or no sufficient cause. None of that should happen. Because some people consider it like entertainment too. When charity is given without damaging the home, there is reward for the person who does it and the person, who did the work to bring the wealth in. When a woman dies or the husband dies, it's essential that the husband is pleased with the wife as a prerequisite for paradise. Now, again, like before, it has to be in what is right. And one of the things brought up, right, is that there are punishments that states should do, but that doesn't mean that we grab people and beat them for their crimes and all that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. And people's like, oh, see, you can't be loyal. Just because we have an ideal idea of law doesn't mean we can't follow the law of the state. Now, we're going to practice our religion. We're going to practice our religion. We should have death penalties for the worst of criminals and whippings and letting go of other people and fines and stuff like that in a more appropriate manner. But, that doesn't mean that, we're just going to force them on everybody that's around us or anything like that. That's not at all what we're claiming. Just like a slave can't be liberated until somebody purchases that slave and then uses that opportunity to give them their freedom, a woman cannot be divorced preemptively. You actually have to marry the woman first. Now, you can cancel a marriage that's been put into motion, but, when people say, oh, but Muhammad said that the majority of the people to go to hell are women, it's like, well, more females hit puberty than males hit puberty. So more are accountable. So if everything's exactly equal, that's what you run into. And women tend to live longer. So again, so if more of their age of term of accountability, and of course they hit puberty younger, and that's part of why more of them do, and pretty much everywhere, this is the case. I guess there's some aberrations, but the overall. Now, the coitus during menstruation, one way to atone for it is by giving a half day's good wage. Don't be such that you're full of fear because of the wrong things you do. Be of those full of regard that are doing the right things within and without ritual. The women are not supposed to go out wearing perfume that's going to attract that sort of attention to them. Going out to be amongst the public. And of course, let us remember in Surah 60 about the pledge of the women. And I've hinted about this in my commentary before about the good and the fair. And honestly, with any of this stuff, there's something like, I don't remember the Quranic references, but there, women have rights similar to the men, and, the men, so anything that you see this gender reference, well, there's something of the same category for the other gender. And of course, when it comes to not lying, not stealing, modesty, chastity, the rest of it, there's not a double standard. Men and women have different bodies, but and we just talk about the areas where sexual arousal is possible, well, things become exactly equal, don't they? And the women get some allowance, right? The men don't get allowance their whole life, the same area. If you aren't sure whether it's a man or a woman in a gathering, then you should, ask first. And perhaps it is important for there to be the distinction between that. Now, if a woman can put some dye on her nail or something like that, now some things can or should be used and some things can't. That's another issue. But that also would indicate, well, those guys that paint their nails, maybe that shouldn't be done because it's a mark of distinction for a woman. If you're going through hardship, remember those who went through hardship before, particularly the prophets. Whoever has the patience and regard with the prophetic daughters, then that will be a shield. Now, patience is not just you put up with anything. Now, if you're being persecuted because you've said the right things, and that's different. Patience can also be the Hadith, but it's important to know which one is, from the inspired words of the prophet, because those are the better ones than anything that any other individual could come up with. And certainly the revelation is even better than that. So there's a Quranic verse is even higher than the prophetic supplication for the issues. And that practice is one of those important things for the continuing of the worship of the dawn prayer until the forenoon. The sun had risen above the horizon and clearly, and then you say some extra prayer. Even the polytheist parent deserves good treatment and good relationship. I mean, exception for medical cases, but otherwise women should not shave their heads. Women should either travel with their husband or travel with someone who they can't marry, that close of a relationship. Now, it is also said that women will be of the minority in the paradise of the hereafter, but again, it's not because that's their inherent nature or something like that. It's that there's certain choices to be made. And as much as anything, there's the targeting of women with feminism and all sorts of stuff. And, conflict between the sexes, stirring all that stuff up is just not. It is important to know the signs of emotions and attitudes and stuff of the spouse. Some of that will show itself up in the wording, and certainly the not mentioning of the spouse's name is usually a clue. Now, it's acceptable to get married for the material reasons, and there's a case listed where a woman was married for a pair of shoes. It's perfectly fine to have things, even for the place of worship, handled by a menstruating woman. Some cultures don't do that. The Bible's rather strict when it comes to a lot of that stuff.